Welcome to Magnet Minutes. I'm Jordan Kimmel, and this is an update for March 9th, 2022. And today, rather than a general market comment, we brought in a special guest. We have Keith Franco, and Keith is the Senior Vice President, Chief Security Architect over at Format Cyber. And folks, with what's going on in the news today, the cybersecurity market's on everybody's mind right now. So let me just say it's a pleasure to have you. And Keith, thanks so much for joining us.
Likewise, Jordan, thank you for inviting me on. Really appreciate it.
Well, it's a super timing thing. I know you have a lot of expertise. You've been in the business for a while. So, let's start with the obvious. There's a war going on right now with Russia and Ukraine. All we hear about is potential cyber threats and issues that may come up in cybersecurity. So why don't you maybe even touch on that, touch on the cyber warfare that may come out of what's going on in Ukraine?
Sure. I mean, actually, the cyber warfare between Russia and Ukraine has already begun. In the days leading up to the invasion, which I believe started on February 24th, Russia actually knocked out a number of Ukraine government entities and banks via cyber attacks. So that may have been done, purposely just to raise the alarm that, hey, we're serious, or it may have been a bit more strategic. I'm not really sure. I think the important thing to note about this, though, is just, I hate to introduce the thought, but like nuclear attacks, cyber attacks, when done under the auspices of war, can quickly escalate because they can be so damaging. When you think about not just banks and maybe government websites that provide some services, but when we get into things like water treatment plants and utilities and the power grid and hospitals, if you knock those offline, even just one of them, let alone all of them, your country, your society is going to crumble pretty quickly. Obviously, in Ukraine, when they're under attack. And honestly, this stuff has been going on for decades in some form or another. But I think this is historic in the sense that this is probably the most prominent that we've seen yet in terms of active cyber warfare.
Right. And so, when you talk about cyber warfare, I mean, it's in the news all the time, Keith. And so, maybe it's changed a little bit, but, the cybersecurity market, as we hear about it, obviously there's been remedies, band-aids for years and years. Tell me how the market's changed maybe over the last 15 or so years you've been in it.
Well, I think the most obvious change is that it went from being dominated by a handful of large, well-known companies such as Symantec, McAfee, Trend Micro, Cisco. Today, we have literally hundreds of startup cybersecurity firms, some of which, they've grown into large entities themselves like CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, et cetera. There is just a massive market for it. It's probably oversaturated at this point, which is why we're seeing so much, in the acquisition space, mergers, et cetera. So, I would say the two big players right now, US and Israel for sure, they both have just such a huge amount of knowledge coming out of the military and government or the intelligence organizations. And a lot of time those guys and women, when they leave the government, they go on to the private sector and they form their own companies. Israel, for example, has a partnership with Boston, where, the Boston Israel, I forget what it's called, but it's basically an alliance where Boston provides certain financial incentives for Israeli cybersecurity companies to open up their US presence in Boston and then nurture it from there. So I think the big change is just the absolute saturation in the number of players in the field. I think also on the technical side, there's a much greater amount of, I'm going to say, choice these days. It used to be people were really focused on, like a castle, they wanted to build high walls to keep people out, right? But the attackers have become increasingly good at scaling those walls. So now in the past decade, it's really shifted from, yes, we need high walls, but we also need to have a strong core. So if somebody gets, we need to monitor the walls, first of all. Is somebody trying to climb it? And if so, can we dump hot oil on them to prevent them from getting up here in the first place? And if not,
Right.
if they do get in, we need defense in depth is what they refer to it as, where you have multiple lines. I could use all kinds of analogies, war movies, Lord of the Rings. There's that great scene in the second
Right.
one, the two towers, where the last hour of the movie is basically an attack against a castle under siege. And they start with the archers hitting the troops, and then as the troops move in and scale the walls, they pour the oil, they throw the boulders over the side, and then as they finally scale the castle, that's when the hand-to-hand combat starts. And then they retreat
Right.
further in into protected silos.
Well, you know what? It sounds awful scary. It sounds like science fiction, but it's all too true. And you know what? What I find interesting is that, with all the awareness of cybersecurity and all the money that's spent on it, you just constantly hear about breaches. Some
Mhm.
of them, I know come from like the human side, where I heard recently just of a phishing example. People call up, they say they're so and so. Can you give me the password? And boom. I mean, how crazy is that? But you
Mhm.
keep hearing about, one attack, and you hear about ransomware over and over. So with all our awareness, like, is it that the criminals keep inventing something and there's a game between the experts and the criminals here?
That's part of it. I mean, it's absolutely a game of cat and mouse. They up their attacks, the sophistication of their attacks, and in response, we up the ante on the defensive side. And once we install those new attack methods, they come up with new methods. That is part of it. I think, though, you hinted at something. The human element is present, and you can't fix that. I mean, people still
Right.
get into car accidents every day. Despite all the technology that we have on cars now, people are still crashing into trees, driving drunk. Even if you just have a bad day, maybe you didn't get enough sleep and your judgment is off and your reactions are impaired. Well, it's the same thing when you're in the office. If you only got 2 hours of sleep and you had a fight with your spouse and you come in a bad mood and, just off your game that day, well, you're going to be a heck of a lot more susceptible to clicking on that bogus link, or just doing something in error that's going to introduce a threat to the organization. You're not going to get rid of that. Now, security awareness training is very important. I agree. You do need to reinforce the basics repeatedly, but you're never going to get to a point where you can just train that away or train that completely out of the organization. Um, that's definitely one factor. The cat and mouse is a second factor for sure. And honestly, look, as we approach the mainstream introduction of things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and when we get to it, quantum computing, you're going to be looking at just an exponential growth in not only the computing power, but the methodologies and the attack vectors that are introduced from that. You're going to be able to augment the creativity and the intelligence of the attackers to find new ways to get in. And
Right.
obviously, that'll trickle down to the defensive side as well. One other thing I want to stress, though, is the attackers uh, they have a significant advantage versus the defenders. So, especially if they're state sponsored by, whether it's by the U.S., by China, by whomever, or by organized crime, they're dumping, millions, tens of millions, etc., into this, and they assemble, these massive teams of elite talent. Some of whom, I hate to say it, may have trickled out of some of these intelligence
Right.
agencies. There's definitely a black market for this. They can continually hammer away at the door of your house until they get in. They only have to be right, or they only have to get it right one time. As a defender, you have to successfully defend every single attack. And yes, there's technology that can help with that and automate it, but you also need the human element to be able to make sense of what's going on and discern between, all right, what was an opportunistic attack where literally somebody is out there, I call it a shotgun approach. They're just shooting blindly into the night, hoping that they hit something, versus a
Right.
targeted
So
attack.
let me ask you this, Keith. We talk about how to best protect. The worst part of my day, frankly, is password, entering one password after another to every
Yep.
place I need to get into. Maybe what you want to talk about is two or three examples how we could best protect ourselves, and then maybe what I want to hear about is you could talk about Format Cyber, your company,
Sure.
what makes you a little bit different, and how you help your clients.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, passwords continue to be a huge issue for individuals, families, organizations. I don't think we've seen the adoption of some of the biometrics like facial recognition as quickly as people were hoping. The basics here you've probably heard: do not reuse passwords. So certainly not on your email or anything sensitive, your 401k login, banking, investment, etc. Don't
And
share your passwords with
one, two,
anyone.
three, four, five is a bad password.
Yeah, like in Spaceballs on his luggage, right? No, absolutely not. I mean, they actually publish like lists every year, sometimes quarterly, of like the worst passwords they're seeing out there. So, you don't want to use something on that list. No A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously, and also you want to be careful about the information you're sharing on social media. So I don't know, maybe you buy a new car, like maybe you got whatever, a new Camry, and you post a picture on Facebook. So now if I'm doing recon on you, I see you just bought a 2022 Camry red. Maybe that's your password. Maybe you thought to use that as a password because, the structure of it isn't terrible. 2022 red Camry with uppercase and lowercase. It's relatively long, but it pertains to you. So I would advise against using passwords that pertain to you, specifically when it's something that other people know about. So information they can easily glean about you that you may have looped into a password. Really, I think the best solution still, and a lot of people aren't using them, are password managers. There's a little bit of a learning curve to get them in place, but once you've done that initial legwork, you're just in a far better place. And it can even create strong random passwords for you. And the beauty is you don't need to remember them. You can add the software to your PC, to your smartphone, and then when you need to log in, you just open up your app and it takes care of it for you.
Right. So I know I signed up for one of those and I couldn't figure out how to use it.
Mhm.
So I know I have my password for that, and I won't name the service. But why don't you get into for a moment, Format Cyber, your company, what makes you separate, what makes you different, and how you're helping your clients.
Yeah, so Format Cyber came about a year ago. Myself and my business partner, Gary, we had previously worked together at Michael Kors and run the information security department there. So Format Cyber offers cybersecurity services, consulting, and staffing. So if you need to hire somebody, we can help you with that job search. If you just need somebody to maybe act as the security leader at your firm, but you don't want to hire somebody full time, we can serve that function as well. Or if you just need somebody to come in, do a health check, take a look at all of your system software, your network, your processes. We can review all that, do a gap analysis and give you a prioritized list of, hey, here's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of return on your dollar to improve your security posture. What separates us, I mean, look, to be quite honest, I don't think we're reinventing the wheel. I think one approach that we have, though, is just that, unlike a lot of firms, we tend to be very flexible with how we approach it. So some places might literally want to just hit the reset button on their security and start from the ground up. We're happy to do that. Other places are going to say, no, we've invested deeply in this over the past years or decade. So we just want you to come in. We want that second opinion, and then tell us, like, what are the top 3 or the top 5 areas that we should either improve upon or look at replacing fully, whether it's a process or a security system.
Okay, well, so Keith, why don't we wrap up by giving us your website, how they could find you, and then maybe what we'll do is we'll have another segment down the road where, as a money manager, there's several publicly traded. We could look at the specific companies that are the most well-known publicly traded, look at their both valuations, which what I like to look at, and then
Right.
maybe you can talk about their strengths and weaknesses. So why don't we wrap up with your website and let people find you?
Sure. So our website is www.formatcyber. So that's formatcyber.com. All of our contact info is there. We have a contact us form, phone number, etc. So if anybody would like to reach out and discuss their cybersecurity challenges, happy to chat with you.
Great. Well, Keith, it's been a pleasure. It's a subject that literally you can't watch a news show without hearing about cybersecurity, cyber threats.
Yep.
It's top of mind. So it's Keith Franco, And Keith, we appreciate you coming on, sharing more about Format Cyber, and we know we'll see you soon.
Likewise. Thank you, Jordan.